Hello and welcome back to Different Who. It has been a while since I last touched this channel, and to be honest, I've been a bit lazy, what can I say? I've been working on stuff like uni, finishing college, my other YouTube channel, stuff like that. So it is nice to finally be able to sit down and start this 30th season of What If Doctor Who wasn't cancelled. So without further ado, let's finally begin. The first story would have been Blood Heat by Jim Mortimore. It was 4 parts long, and it lasted from the 6th to the 27th of March, 1993. The story would begin with a cold open showcasing the Doctor and Benny travelling together after the events of Long Barrow. It would showcase a few adventures that they had had since. The cold open would end with someone being transmitted into the TARDIS, that person being Ace. Ace would explain to the Doctor that the Time Lords had been experimenting with alternative history and that they needed his help. The Doctor would initially refuse, citing his previous encounters with his race. But Ace would mention that Earth is involved, and the Doctor would then reluctantly agree. Therefore, the TARDIS would be sent through a Time Lord-made wormhole, and would be brought to Earth in 1993. However, this Earth would be completely different to our own, as this Earth would be occupied by the Silurians and the Sea Devils, and would be set after the events of Doctor Who and the Silurians. By the end of the first part, the Doctor would meet an older version of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, who would reveal that the Silurians took over after the Doctor had died in 1970. Throughout the story, the Doctor would notice that the Brigadier wanted to nuke the Silurians, but the Doctor would put a stop to this from happening, and would force the two parties into discussing a peace treaty and a coexistence plan. Benny and Ace would become close friends during this story, as it would feature a 3-month time jump between Part 2 and 3. In Part 4, the Doctor and co would discover that alternative universes like this, made by the Time Lords, are actually damaging the home universe by shortening its lifespan by billions of years. And therefore, the Doctor would have to fight against the Brigadier and the Silurians, who have now teamed up, so he can get to the TARDIS that his former self left in 1970. On the planet and cause a time run with his universe's TARDIS and this universe's TARDIS. That would kill everything in the universe and would destroy the alternate timeline. Inside his own TARDIS, the Doctor would be almost a shell of himself, before claiming that the Time Lords were to blame for all of the death today. Finally, Ace would depart from the TARDIS after saying her goodbyes. The Doctor would ask Ace to keep her discovery a secret from the Time Lords, to which Ace agrees before leaving. The story was well received, but it is generally seen more as a mediocre story, but it was saved by the inclusion of Nicholas Courtney. The story would begin the arc that the rest of this Doctor's era would follow through with. The following week would start the next story, Transit by Ben Aaronovitch, which is 4 parts long and lasted from the 3rd to the 21st of April 1993. The story would be set in London in the 23rd century, and would mostly be set in a transit system that is able to travel between planets in the solar system. With this being in 1993, Pluto would be included as a planet in the transit line. This would later be retconned in a 2013 short story, where the writer would say that Pluto was classified as a planet again in the future. The Doctor would discover that there is something causing deaths in the transit system, and so he and Benny would board the train to find out what's going on. They would find that there is a multi-dimensional being that the Doctor would call Fred that is causing all of the killing in the transit system, because the transit system is cutting through his dimension, and it would be revealed that Fred is the ruler of the dimension, and as the Doctor and Benny enter the dimension to discover it has a completely different laws of physics to our dimension. The story would end with a happy ending, as the Doctor would move the dimension to another part in space, so that the inhabitants can live in peace. The story would end with the Doctor telling Benny and the audience that the species of that dimension world will continue to progress and eventually become some of the smartest beings in the universe, before the Doctor jokes. Apart from me, obviously. The story was well received, even though fans could see that the use of limited sets was just a cost-saving measure. Some argued that it worked in the story's strength. The next week had the next story, The Dimension Riders, by Daniel Blythe, which was 4 parts long and lasted from the 1st to the 22nd of May, 1993. The Doctor and Benny are on holiday, when suddenly the TARDIS nearby starts sounding the cloister bell. The Doctor rushes to see what is wrong, and takes the TARDIS to a space station in the future. But as soon as he lands the TARDIS, the Doctor would throw up, and due to this, realises that there is something wrong with time itself on this station. The Doctor would find the remaining crew on the ship, but then would realise that they are in fact not part of any crew at all, and they are all from different points in Earth's history between the ancient Greece times and the 23rd century. The Doctor would find out that somehow time is broken on the station. He initially thinks the Time Lords are to blame for this, but upon investigation, Benny finds out that in fact, the Time Lords had nothing to do with this, and that a creature of time known as the Grabberbond is floating around the station's library. And for a first for the show, the monster would be completely made out of CGI. And whilst looking dated today, the show would receive credit for doing something so ambitious for the time. The Doctor would figure out that the Grabberbond is causing the time to leak through the ship, and therefore causing people to slip through time. And though he is sympathetic towards it, noting that it did try to take care of the humans that it had accidentally sucked through time, the Doctor knows that he must destroy it to save the universe. But then Benny has an idea, and convinces the Doctor to try it. They bring the Grabberbond aboard the TARDIS and take it to the time corridor, where they would set it free. But unknowns to the Doctor and Benny, eventually this would come back to haunt them in the future. The story would be well received for its originality and its inclusion of CGI, showing that the show still had a lot of original ideas after 30 years. The final story of the season was Iceberg by David Panks. It was 4 parts long and lasted from the 29th of May to 19th of June 1993. The story would be set in Antarctica in the far, far future of 2006, and it would feature the return of the Cybermen and the Cyber Controller, as well as a cliffhanger for the 30th anniversary special. The Doctor and Benny arrive in Antarctica. Ian Fraser would try and bring production to the real Antarctica, but with a budget of the year needed to stretch across 4 stories and 2 specials, and Richard Griffiths flat out refusing to do it, he abandoned the idea, and he later claimed in an interview that I'm glad he didn't do that. The Doctor and Benny would join a camp of humans in a base, and would be met by suspicion by the humans, but the Doctor explains that he's here to check out the base. The crew would look at each other with unease and bring the Doctor to see what they think he has come to expect. The Doctor would look into an iceberg and find an old friend, a Cyberman. Benny would recall hearing about a Cyberman invasion in the following year, confusing the crewmates as they wouldn't understand that the Doctor and Benny are time travellers. But before they can question her, the ice would suddenly start to melt, and the Cybermen would become alive, and it would stagger towards the Doctor as the first part ends on that cliffhanger. Throughout the rest of the story, some members of the crew would be killed by the Cybermen. It is also able to summon more Cybermen, who are able to land a spacecraft onto the ice and invade, but it's just as they were about to kill the Doctor in part 3, he finally reveals his identity, and then is able to trick the Cybermen into a corner, and he's able to destroy them. He then says his goodbyes and apologies to the remaining members of the crew, and departs to the TARDIS with Benny. In the TARDIS, they talk about how they are hungry, so agree to go and get some food in the corridor. The camera pans to outside of the TARDIS in space, and we see something else following the TARDIS. We go inside that spacecraft, and we see none other than the Master is following the TARDIS. And that is the cliffhanger to the 30th anniversary special. The story would receive positive reviews from fans and press, and overall the season would receive a very fairly received season. Fans enjoyed all 4 stories, but there was nothing groundbreaking this year. All 4 stories would be novelised alongside the 30th anniversary specials in March of 1994, and the VHS tapes would later be released in 1994 in a box set, and later in 1998 would be re-released as single releases. In August of 1993, the BBC would self-publish a Doctor Who video game for both the SNES and Mega Drive, and it would release in the UK only. The game would be called Doctor Who and the Game of the Daleks, and it would allow the player to play as any Doctor in an RPG-style game to help him defeat the Daleks. The game would receive mediocre reviews by game magazines, but it would become well-loved by fans. In November, Doctor Who would return for 2 more stories, one being Dimensions in Time, that would have been almost the same as ours, but with the 8th Doctor and Benny in place of Seven and Ace. The story still would have been set in Albert Square as a way to keep costs down. It would be the first time Doctor Who had been on BBC One since 1989, and the story would be better received than our version was, as it would not be the only story made for the 30th anniversary, as there was a second one, released on the 4th of December 1994, called The Eight Doctors by Terrance Dicks. The story would pick off almost exactly where Iceberg left off, with the Doctor noticing something following him and Benny. He would try and divert away from it, but would fail to lose the Master, who would in turn slam his TARDIS into the Doctor's, forcing the Doctor to call for help across time. This is where we'd first see the third Doctor in his TARDIS. He would pick up on the distress signal and come to help. This wouldn't deter the Master, who would just keep slamming the TARDIS into the 8th Doctor's TARDIS. At this point it will have taken quite a beating, so the Doctor pulls a switch, and he explains that the switch is for emergencies only. He would then show Benny the outside of the TARDIS. They had landed on Gallifrey. Once stepping out of the door, the Doctor would meet Ace, who was happy to see the Doctor, and especially Benny once again. Suddenly the third Doctor would land his TARDIS and come face to face with the 8th Doctor. Benny would ask the Doctor to explain, but the Doctor would get Ace to do it instead. By this point, Ace would know about regeneration, but would try and do her best to explain this to Benny. Over in the high ends of Gallifrey, the High President Flavia would be informed of the Doctor's arrival on the planet, and would send a squad of guards to escort the Doctor to her chambers. But once the guards leave, the Master's TARDIS would land inside of the President's chambers, and he steps out with an atomizer in hands and shrinks the remaining guards in the room, leaving just him and the President. He would order that the Doctor would be brought to his TARDIS. Flavia would send a message to the guards on their way to the Doctor, claiming that she needs the Doctor's help. The Master was dying, and the body of Tremas was starting to decay, and the Master was slowly losing his grip on life. Once the guards arrive to the Doctor, they explain what's going on with the Master, and the 8th Doctor would reluctantly agree to help. The Master would order just the Doctor to enter the TARDIS with him, and his TARDIS leaves with him and the 8th Doctor inside. Inside the TARDIS, the Master would strap the Doctor to a table, and he has a machine ready to harness the Doctor's remaining regenerations and take them for him. The 8th Doctor would establish a psychic link with the 3rd Doctor, who would summon the other Doctors from various points in the timeline. So the 4th Doctor and Sarah Jane, the 5th Doctor and Nyssa, the 6th Doctor on his own, and the 7th Doctor also on his own. The 3rd Doctor would also try and summon the 1st and 2nd, but would be unable to. Patrick Troughton and William Hartnell would have appearances in this episode via archival footage only, therefore giving the title of The 8 Doctors. Eventually, the band of Doctors would gather into the 8th Doctor's TARDIS and would fly out to find the Master and the 8th Doctor. Back with the Master and the 8th Doctor, the Doctor would manage to stall for just a long enough of time, but finally, the Master would start to begin his machine with his TARDIS. But then, his TARDIS would be smacked by the Doctor's TARDIS, and Benny would get close enough between the two TARDISes to jump between TARDISes. She would have Ace's baseball bat, and she would hit the weakened Master over the head, knocking him out. Benny would unstrap the Doctor, who would thank Benny for saving him and would say that he's happy to see her. And before leaving the TARDIS, the Doctor would set the Master's TARDIS to crash back onto Gallifrey, and then he would jump onto his own TARDIS with Ace, and he would meet his other selves and companions. He would be happy to see his friends, but a little less happy to see his past selves. Eventually, one by one, each Doctor and companion would disappear, before just 3 and 8 remain. The two would bid their farewells on Gallifrey before 3 leaves in his own TARDIS. The Doctor would meet with Flavia to see if she's alright, but she would mention that she had offered the Master a set of regenerations in exchange for the Doctor's life, and that they had gone missing. The Doctor sighs, knowing that the Master would still be out there somewhere. Flavia would say that she's happy to see the Doctor. The Doctor, however, would not share this idea, as he had still not forgiven the Time Lords for his actions in the last few seasons. Leaving for the TARDIS, the Doctor asks Ace if she'll rejoin him, but she declines, stating that she says there's a lot more to learn on Gallifrey. The Doctor would then leave with Benny and set off for some more adventures. The episode would end in the TARDIS, with Benny asking the Doctor what they were going to do now. The Doctor would just simply reply, everything. The episode would receive a high number of viewers, with 15 million people tuning in to watch the 30th anniversary special. The special itself would be well received by fans, but many would complain that the other Doctors were used more as background characters than actual characters in the story. The credits would end with a dedication to Roger Delgado, William Hartnell, Ian Marter, Patrick Troughton and Jacqueline Hill, the latter of which was due to have a small cameo in the special, but had sadly died before filming could take place. And that's it for the 1993 year of Doctor Who. Following the success of the anniversary special, the series would be moved back to BBC One for the 9pm slot on a Saturday for 1994. But that's for another day. So join me next time when we go over the 31st season of Doctor Who, had it not been cancelled.